Thank you. Thank you for coming here to talk to a topic of conversation around protected workloads on AWS, which I've had that conversation with many of my customers here in the last few months. So before I get started though, I wanted to highlight some of the voices of one of my customers and also who worked at the Cyber Centre as our accrediting authority. This was from a few years ago at a previous Canberra summit, where Alistair McGibbon was the keynote speaker when he was at cybersecurity advisor at the PMNC at the time. And he really highlighted in this talk was that as well as the benefits of innovation that the cloud offer, he saw that the benefit was also that it would help make Australia more secure in their cybersecurity posture. And he was highlighting that innovation he saw as good, and the cloud was good because it would help departments get off of sort of legacy workloads, which are some of the things that he saw as the biggest risk that he had out there in the government sector. So I'm going to go through this agenda, talk about AWS and security, talk to what the status is on our protected classification, certification, discuss the shared responsibility model, probably something you've seen pretty regularly if you've seen a AWS security talk, but it's important to understand sort of artifacts we provide to help you at each side of that model. And then talk through some of the guidance that we've made available to help you build and start building protected workloads. So why is security traditionally so hard? So some of the things that we see in our customers are things like there's often a lack of visibility in traditional environments. You've got very heterogeneous in a collection of equipment and so on, and there's often, people talk about, oh, I'm not sure what this server does, or that type of thing. And there also tends to be a very low degree of automation traditionally, often because there's such a diverse amount of infrastructure there. And the way to control that in a traditional world has often been to give people a decision. Do I allow them to move fast and quickly and innovate? Or do I put in processes to slow them down in the hope that that will raise the level of security in the environment? With the cloud and in AWS, we turn that around where you can have the best of both worlds here. We've got a very flexible environment that you can do to innovate quickly, but it's also highly controlled and it allows you to highly automate and audit your environment so you can stay secure. And we're seeing many customers running highly sensitive workloads on the AWS platform now. And there's just a few of those here, and there's many more running even locally here in Canberra. And in fact, even the analyst community are starting to talk to their customers and highlighting how the conversation really needs to turn from is the cloud secure to more how you should architect your solutions to take advantage of the cloud and to ensure that you're secure when you're running on the cloud. So for us at AWS security, we talk of being job zero or a number one priority. So we give you this environment, very high scale, global deployment model, but a model where you can determine which region you move to and use, and you can scale your workloads very quickly. The high degree of automation can facilitate you building a secure and well-managed environment. We work with governments and regulators across the globe on issues such as privacy, to ensure we meet the various regulations of those domains. And we have a privacy white paper for the Australian context, for example. The ability to automate helps you in reacting to security events much more quickly than in a traditional world. And our services are built with automation in mind, and particularly our security services as well. And then if you have the need for services outside of what we offer, we have a very broad and deep partner ecosystem, and even things like a marketplace where you can get access to, say, to tools that you're maybe using in an on-premises environment. And then to prove the security of that is something where we leverage our compliance program. And I want to sort of dive deep a little bit more into that now. So right from the beginning of AWS, we recognise the need to have world-class security and then to demonstrate that to our customers. So you heard in the keynote about some of these innovations, but how do you know these things are actually being put in place? And that's where our compliance programs are really important. So this started off initially with things like globally recognised standards, so that's things like the ISO 27000 series, things like SOC compliance, or PCI compliance for, say, handling credit card information. But we very quickly then realised we needed to also provide guidance around government-specific requirements across the globe or other regulation bodies. And so that led to things like in the US being part of the FedRAMP program. We're one of the first providers on that. And then most relevant to this audience is the IRAP program for judging compliance against the ISM. So I'm going to give a little bit of a glossary for those that aren't familiar with all the terminology in this space. So we've leveraged what's called the IRAP process, or an IRAP assessor, against the ISM, the Information Security Manual, which are the controls that a federal government adhere to. And our certification authority in this case was the Australian Cyber Security Centre, which is part of the Australian Signals Directorate. So the great news on that is, as of January this year, we've been assessed at the protected level and are listed on the cloud certified list at both the protected and unclassified DLM level. And this is not just for sort of basic infrastructure as service type offerings, but it's also for a broad range of 42 services at the protected level. And to get protected, we took the approach of leveraging our standard Sydney region. And we felt this was important because it gave our customers the fastest and access to the broadest set of service capabilities. It also means you get the same standard services that you may have already been using at the unclass level on AWS at the same standard public pricing models. So there's no extra cost for running a workload at the protected level. It gives you access to that familiar region that you may already be using on other workloads. It gives you access to the large scale of the Sydney region with its 3 availability zones, so to facilitate you building highly resilient solutions. And we've made all the guidance that you need to build these workloads available immediately on launch of this certification in January. So there's no special enclave, no special environment you need to go to access our protected services. They're available for all users to take advantage of. So for those that aren't familiar with the classification, when I say protected, what I'm referring to is the federal government's Protected Security Manual, so it's from the Attorney General's. Protect is the first security classification level where there's a high business impact for confidentiality issues. Now the scope of our protected certification is the Sydney region. Now the Sydney region, it's important to understand what we mean at AWS by region. A region for us is quite a major undertaking. It's not like maybe some other providers that you may deal with. When we say a region, it means at least 2 availability zones. And in fact, in the case of Sydney, it's 3 availability zones in that Sydney basin. Each availability zone is composed of at least 1 data centre, and there's no sharing of data centres across availability zones. They have different power grids, different cooling, different network providers going into them, so that if there's an issue in one, it's highly unlikely there'll be an issue in another availability zone. And this allows you to build those highly resilient solutions. We have high bandwidth, low latency connectivity between them, again, so you can do things like synchronous replication and so on. Now the process to get protected, it was quite a a fairly long process, probably over 18 months in the making. We would love it to be faster, but that's the nature of the process at this point in time. So it started off in phase one. This is where we hired an IRAP assessor, engaged them, provided their documentation to them. This is probably very familiar to you if you've been through this process yourselves. They worked with the service teams to understand the controls we put in place, even went over to Seattle, for example, as part of that. And there was what's called a stage one report from that. In stage two, again, the IRAP assessor was involved building up their stage two report. Also, this stage involved things like physical audit aspects. So this was verifying the physical security with a SCEC assessment across the Sydney region. And then in the sort of final months of last year, I was involved in, we had deep dive workshops with the Australian Cyber Security Centre, where they took those reports coming out of both the IRAP and SCEC assessments and wanted to deep dive on us around various areas. And we also worked with them during that time collaboratively on building some of the associated documentation, which I'll talk about shortly. So it's great we've got protected, and often the next question from my customers is, well, what are the services that are now certified at the protected level? And the great news here is it's not just about infrastructure, compute, storage, networking. Now it's about a very broad range of capability that government can take advantage of. So things from big data, analytics services, Hadoop clusters as a service, streaming data, and so on. We've got managed desktop offerings, so you can run desktops as a service at the protected level. We have managed database offerings, so rather than you having to do the undifferentiated heavy lifting of managing a database, whether it's relational or a data warehouse or a NoSQL database, we've got service offerings at the protected level. For developers building solutions, we have service to do things such as queuing, workflows, notification services, API gateways, and so on. And then even within the compute area, it's not just about, say, virtual machines with EC2 now, but if you're, like many of my customers, starting to look at things like container-based deployments with Docker, for example, we've got Elastic Container Service. And for those that are sort of jumping that wave to the sort of serverless technologies, we've got Amazon Lambda there at the protected level. And then we've got a range of services to help you manage and secure your solutions. So in particular, things like CloudTrail and GuardDuty, which actually uses AI and ML technologies to give you indications of intrusion, for example. And these services have actually been called out specifically by the Cyber Centre to be recommending customers turn these on in all accounts in all regions. And in the networking space, we now have a content distribution network listed at the protected level. So great initiatives for our customers. So sometimes I get the question, well, is there a special checkbox or a special domain, or where's the special area I go to use these services? And again, like I mentioned, the great news here is there is no difference. These are the same services that you're using today at unclassified or unclassified DLM. You can take advantage of them at the protected level now. All these services, of course, can be used at the unclassified level. And then additionally, at the unclassified DLM level, there are an additional 4 services that were certified at that level. And also, very importantly, I think, is the Cyber Centre called out in their report too, was that you can leverage unclassified DLM services in a protected solution. So the thing here is, as long as they're not actually storing protected data. A great example here from this list is like things like Route 53, that's a global DNS service. So you might have a protected workload that needs a DNS record. Typically, you wouldn't put protected data in your DNS record, so you can leverage that service for your DNS handling. So I've talked about how the investments we're putting in securing security of the cloud and how we've proven that through things like our protected certification. And So this is just showing the shared responsibility model now. It's just like in any environment where you use various pieces of infrastructure that you build on top of, your solution then needs, of course, to be certified and accredited to operate. So that means when you're using our services, you will be configuring them to meet your specific requirements. So do you have encryption turned on? What ports are open? What identity providers you want to take advantage of, and so on. And so we, of course, then provide you advice and resources that you can use on both sides of that shared responsibility model. So for the security of the cloud side, at the bottom here, we have a service called AWS Artifact. So this is a service just like all of our others, available in the console or via the APIs, that you can leverage to download all of our audit and compliance documentation. And you can lock that down to only the required people in your organisation that need access to that, for example. So you can go to that service today and download our full IRAP report documentation. We also have a compliance landing page with a variety of other sort of guidance and documentation to help you understand the security and controls that we put in place. Then to help you with the building your solutions on the cloud, or security in the cloud, we have resources such as our well-architected framework that talks about the different aspects of security and well-architecting an application. We have a landing page for security, a wealth of material that you can leverage. And we also have a team of solution architects that can help you in working on a solution. But to put this into a bit more context around the actual protected certification, I want to show what the specific documents you would receive if you go to that artifact service and download the protected package. So to cover off the security of the cloud aspects, we have there our Stage 2 IRAP report. So this is from Foresight, our IRAP provider in this case. And then there was also the Cyber Centre's certification report, which outlined their findings after reviewing that Stage 2 report and the deep dive workshops with us. So in there they give you the exact call out of which services are certified, at what level, and any mitigations that they may have called out. And then at the top here, we've provided documentation then, though, to help you in building protected workloads. And in fact, both ourselves and the Cyber Centre have built documentation there. Because in fact, the Cyber Centre, this was one area they really wanted to focus on, was making sure customers had good advice on how to build workloads in the cloud. So what I'm going to do now is just focus on those top two documents, because that's all about actually how do you actually build a protected workload. So the first of those documents was what's called the consumer guide. So this is on the Cyber Centre letterhead, so developed by the Cyber Centre during that sort of late last year. Certainly we were involved and collaborated with them on that and gave a lot of advice, but like I said, this is on their letterhead, so this is the official sort of government position. You download that through Artifact and you get that whole package. You might have to, just like any advice in this space, you might have to adapt this to your specific application or business case. And I'd encourage you to talk to both your AWS team and to the Cyber Centre if you've got queries in that space. And like I said, one of the things that called out here is that you can leverage unclassified DLM services in a protected system, provided that unclassified DLM service doesn't actually store protected data itself. So what does the consumer guide look like? So this is just showing the main sort of headings within it. And if you're a security professional and you look at this list, you're probably not seeing any surprises here. These are all pretty much best practice types of things you're going to think about when building a solution. So the first ones here are things like protection of data in transit, protection of data at rest. And no surprises there, they're recommending leveraging encryption in both of those cases. So for data at rest, in particular, they've called out the use of one of our services called the Key Management Service, or KMS. So they're recommending, wherever possible, you turn that on for all services in a workload. For the data sovereignty aspect, so they've recommended the use of the Sydney region at the protected level. because we have a region here locally, so that's their preferred region. Incident response, they're calling out that you should have some sort of incident response process in place. They highlighted things like leveraging our support offerings to assist with that, leveraging things like our security bulletins and so on. Logging, monitoring, auditing your environment, knowing what's there. So again, no surprises. So you should have those sort of facilities in place. And they called out a number of our services that help you in that area. Things like CloudTrail for logging all the API calls at the AWS level, things like CloudWatch for monitoring your servers and so on. And then segmentation and segregation, so limiting blast radius, controlling access to environments. So there's kind of two areas of highlight in this. One's around network segmentation and control. So again, just like traditional environments, segmenting your networks, controlling traffic flows within your networks in a best practice solution. But also looking at segmentation and segregation at, say, the account level at AWS. So maybe running multiple accounts for different purposes. And then in the service hardening area, so this is where we dive into things like hardening server images, again, a familiar concept to most people, having a golden image, patching your servers regularly, those types of aspects. And then at the end, other guidance, so one of the things they highlighted there was as well as this protected package to help you build solutions, there's a wealth of information from AWS around security in general, and you should certainly look to that advice as well. So that's the consumer guide, which was provided by the Cyber Centre. Then the other document that we've provided is what we've called the Protected Reference Architecture. And this is just showing the sort of top-level, high-level diagram in that, within that architecture. So what we wanted to do here was, this is on AWS letterhead, so this is provided by us, but it was developed collaboratively with the Cyber Centre, and they gave a lot of feedback and suggestions as we built this document out. And so what we really wanted to do here was take that consumer guidance and show you that in the context of a specific application. So we've started off here with it's an MVP approach. It's just a fairly simple web stack here. We've got a web tier with a database back end, a load balancing tier at the front, then connected over direct connect, so you've got private connectivity back to your on-premise environment. So saying that's some sort of, say, intranet protector level application. But what we're then showing is all around that is all the controls and that you're putting in place to secure that application to meet those the guidance in the consumer guidance. So things like over the direct connect, having VPNs for encryption in transit, turning on KMS for encryption at rest at the EC2 and RDS level in the database. Putting in, having multiple subnets to partition your network environment, having security groups around every server to control exactly what ports go in and out. Putting on logging, appropriate roles to minimise, have a least privilege type architecture. The other sort of diagram here then was, this was something that the Cyber Centre were keen for us to put in, was to then show this within a multi-account sort of structure. So most sort of enterprises using AWS will end up with more than one AWS account. And so this workload icon here just shows what you saw before in that diagram. It's really just one account in a broader sort of canvas in your organisation. And the reason you might do this is you might have other accounts set up for some organisational roles, such as billing and governance across the organisation. You might have security, SecOps accounts, or shared services type accounts. And this highlighted some of the use of things like AWS Organisation to actually apply policy across those accounts to control what can be done at a whole of service level even in each of those accounts. So I mentioned other guidance too. So this slide, what I'm showing here is the alignment of this reference architecture to some of our other guidance, such as our cloud adoption framework. So the cloud adoption framework looks at adopting cloud in a very broad sense across not just the technology aspects, but things like people, training, and security. And this is just looking at the security perspective, where we outline these sort of 5 pillars here around identity, detective controls, infrastructure security, data protection, and incident response. And what underneath that then, I've listed, these are all the services and controls that have been called out in that consumer guidance and reference architecture, and how they map to that cloud adoption framework. So in the identity space, for example, leveraging our identity and access management service to apply a least privileged approach to managing your environment, using things like multi-factor authentication, which is a pretty standard requirement these days. Using things like AWS organizations, when you can have multiple accounts, and using service control policies to say lock down, only these servers can be used in this account, or maybe these servers can only be used in the Sydney region, for example. And then federation to some sort of central directory is a typical sort of best practice in this area. So you'll have a single source of directory truth, so that when one person leaves an organization, you can revoke their access across all the AWS accounts, and even potentially all other environments that you're running. In the detective control area, this is where services like CloudTrail were called out, specifically with recommending that you turn this on for all accounts, all regions. CloudTrail gives you an audit of every API call at the AWS control level that's executed within your account. Services like GuardDuty were called out, turn this on in all accounts, all regions. This gives you indications of intrusion or unusual activity, which was mentioned in our keynote today. But also turning on other services, so things like CloudWatch to understand what your servers are doing, collecting application and OS logs. VPC flow logs for understanding what the network environment is going on. In the infrastructure security space, one area that's really highlighted was the use of automation to improve security posture. So things like CloudFormation is mentioned, because the more you can automate and standardize your deployments, the less chance there is for that human error factor to come in. Things like patching, so you can leverage your own patching solutions, or we have a systems manager to provide a patching solution there. Protecting your network boundaries, so things like firewalls with our WAF firewall service, Shield for DDoS protection, and even just the VPC with its security groups and subnet protection. And then verifying that security with things like Inspector to inspect your instances, Config to verify the configuration of your environment. The data protection area, so this touches on use of encryption at rest, encryption in transit. So like I said, KMS was recommended to be turned on for all supported services. And then finally, for incident response, using things like a config rule service that you can actually automatically respond to changes in the environment that, say, could take you out of compliance. So there's, as well as the protected package, there's also a wealth of other resources you can make use of. There's some specifically tailored for the sort of local market here. So there's the Essential 8 is something top of mind of a lot of my customers these days, and I've actually published a blog post on that, explaining how you can leverage and approach the Essential 8 in the context of, say, a AWS cloud-based deployment. The Cyber Centre have published some guidance around cloud security for tenants, and we've written a white paper response to sort of the questions and issues raised in that. So you've got access to that documentation. The actual list of all those 42 services and those 4 unclassified extra ones you can get on our public webpage here at that Services and Scope link. And we have a IRAP landing page which brings all this together. And then, like I said, there's a wealth of other general information in both the security and compliance area that you can make use of. So in summary then, just to finish up, like I said, as of January this year, we've been awarded a protected level certification for a broad range of services. So for 42 services that we're listed at both the protected and unclassified level. So this is the broadest range of any hyperscale cloud provider. We've taken the approach of leveraging our standard Sydney region to get our certification through, to give you the broadest access to the most services we can, and give you access to that familiar region and that high scale region. And we've made all the guidance and documentation available to you to leverage to start building right now. So the call to action here, I'd really encourage you, keen to get feedback on the documentation that we've provided, any additional information that you feel that you need to start building at the protected level. In terms of the scope of those services, I often get the question, well, I want another service that's not on that list, and that's certainly something we're keen to get feedback from our customers as we work on our certification roadmap. So go build, and feel free to reach out if you need help. Thank you.